You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio, man. We are here once again today, man. We have an awesome guest today, man. Very successful guy. Read his bio, man. He's done a lot of amazing things and very adventurous, if I could say, man. We have our one and only guest, Guy Morris, man. He has an amazing website. You can go check out GuyMorrisBooks.com. But today, we're going to learn about his life and all the amazing things that he's been able to do, including being accepted to Harvard. But that's not even the beginning, scratching the surface of all the great things he's been able to do in his lifetime. So first and foremost, Guy, I just want to welcome you to the show. So how you doing, man?
Well, Shamai, first off, thank you so much for the honor of being invited on your show. I'm truly excited about this, and I'm very interested in having this conversation. So thank you very, very much.
You're welcome, man. Great to have you on. Thank you for taking time to be with us. So, man, you had if I can say, a rocky road in the beginning, because in your bio it talked about your childhood. But, man, when we get to the part where you start becoming very successful, I think this is an amazing story. So take us back, man. What was your childhood like?
My childhood still is the product of nightmares for me. I'm a survivor of what I learned later in life was called complex post-traumatic stress. It was it was a series of traumas and abuses that happened so frequently that they all blended together to an extent. I have a great deal of amnesia over parts of my life, my childhood, rather. And I do recall I was a runaway at age 4 or 5. I ran away again at age 6. I tried again at age 13 and was gone in the streets of LA for several months, where I had a rather abrupt, rough learning of what the real world was like out there. And then I finally, and during that time, I survived by working with migrant workers. So I basically went out to the ranches, and I was trucked out like everyone else to the ranches in Southern California, where we would do all the dirtiest work. But that allowed me to survive. And I finally left home for good. I went home briefly and to get a GED. Because I realized that would be sort of a minimum requirement for me to get beyond the migrant worker jobs. And so it was rough. There was a lot of alcoholism. There was a lot of violence. There was a lot of, I learned that everybody lied, and everybody lied about whatever they felt was important. And so I kind of had a negative view of the world kind of going in, but I had a determination that I didn't want. My past could scar me, but I didn't want it to define me. And I was determined that I was going to. I'll say it this way. There was a movie out a few years ago called The Knight's Tale, and in The Knight's Tale there was a line in there that resonated with me deeply, which was, "I wanted to change my stars." And there was a desire in me to change my stars. And I knew that no one would necessarily do it for me. I wasn't in a position where I could bank on somebody kind of bailing me out. I had to decide that my life would be doing whatever it took, but in an honest way, to educate myself, to work hard, to be the hardest worker, to be the best worker, to always be on the leading edge, never allowing myself to rest on my laurels. So I left home at 15. I stumbled around a lot of odd jobs, construction work, driving produce trucks, doing ditch work in Arizona. I hitchhiked to Arizona at the time, where I almost died in the desert because I got stuck there for several hours without any water. But ultimately, over a few years later, I wound up getting married, and through a series of what I could only describe as miracles, I was accepted to go to college at the University of Arizona. And to be honest, at first I was I sucked. I was semi-functionally illiterate. I had to learn how to read. I was 18 units deficient. How I got in was I said, somewhat of a miracle, given how bad off I was. I had never taken SAT scores. I wasn't quite sure how I did it, but I knew in my heart that was, sometimes you only get one good shot in life. And I knew that was my pivot point. That was, if I could succeed, if I could get through and do well, that would change my life. And so I did. I was tireless. And I do mean, I probably should say I was exhausted all the time, because I rarely slept. I worked till way into the middle of the night. And at the time I had just gotten married. My wife had gotten pregnant right away. So I was working at a 7-Eleven to try and support myself, and to get through college. But I ultimately got through, and somewhere around the second or third year, I started going from C's and D's and an occasional B to almost all B's and A's, and something kind of pivoted. I had something in my brain started clicking, something in my confidence started clicking. I started deciding that I could do this. I wasn't going to fail. And I ended up, one of the thing that kind of brought me into notoriety and got me accepted into Harvard, and also got me a scholarship at the U of A to go to grad school, was that I was in the economics program. One of the things we had to do is to build basically it's a mathematical model to project and predict the gross national product and the interest rate and the unemployment. And it was a macroeconomic model. It's the same kind of model that the Federal Reserve builds, that major banks build, that several universities experiment in building, including Wharton and Harvard and others. And I had a theory that was essentially a new theory at the time. This was years ago in the late 70s, that the technology that we were starting to implement in the economy, mainly in the shape of mainframe computers, had not just the value of the cost of the computer itself, but that there was a productivity value in purchasing that equipment and implementing that equipment. And I was essentially the first person to decide that was something real and prove it through my model. And I beat out everybody on the planet in terms of my economic model, which certainly got the Federal Reserve's attention. It got Harvard's attention. But it was a tough thing to do. I would be at the data center. Usually I would get there at midnight, because most of the other students were going to bed about that time. And I would basically stay in the computer center till 8:00 in the morning when my first class was. And I did that for months. And I worked so hard at it, I actually got myself sick. But when while I was still sick, I learned that my model had out forecast everybody. So that got me into grad school, which was an amazing thing for me. And that got me in my first job at IBM. I went on from there to work with another big manufacturer called Burroughs, which was bought up by a company and turned into Unisys. I went from there to work for an international oil and gas company, because at the time, oil and gas essentially was, and still is to a great extent, one of the huge drivers of multiple economies. Most people don't realize how much of our economy, how many of our products come from oil and gas related products. And where I had the opportunity to revolutionize a lot of their processes. I got to a position where I was reporting directly to the CXOs of the company. I got involved in the first major industrial deal between a U.S. company and China after Nixon had basically opened that up. And so it was the beginning of, corporate jets and a lot of good things. I quit there at one point because I started realizing that oil and gas was how much we were polluting the planet. I was part of their team that would was advocating compliance to the EPA standards at the time, which most oil and gas guys basically thought the EPA was close to the devil. And so I was an innovator, but I was an innovator who never forgot that I had also been poor. So I never could drink the Kool-Aid of some of the other individuals and some of the other executives who felt an entitlement to their role, an entitlement with their position. And I never could feel that. So it was about that time, I actually started some events about that time that kind of led to my latter choices in life. One of them was I had designed, similar to designing a macroeconomic model. Along my journey, I forgot to mention, I came to Christ, and I was always intrigued by end time prophecies, and mainly because I felt that most people were getting them wrong. They were interpreting the allegory rather than interpreting the results of the allegory, and so I decided I had gotten divorced by that point, and so the downside was all of my efforts to succeed at work meant that my family life, my home life was not doing well. And so I ultimately was divorced. I became a single parent. But during a weekend when I had myself, I decided that I wanted to try to see if I could prove to myself whether we were truly in I heard a lot of people talking that we were in an end time kind of scenario. I wanted to kind of decide that in my own way. And I did that by finding a number of different prophecies and documented areas, proof where I thought that prophecy might have been fulfilled, and then calculating a rather complex statistical probability model to say, well, what's the probability of that event happening by random chance? And then I would combine that with the next one and saying, well, what's the possibility of this happening by random chance? What's the possibility of them both happening together by random chance? And I spent an entire weekend basically on this, I would call sort of mental obsession. And ultimately came to, I only used about 12 or 15 prophecies. And one of the things that sparked that whole adventure was I was always an avid reader of National Geographic. And I was reading in National Geographic about the loss of fish stocks on a global basis and remembering a prophecy about a third of the fish of the sea dying. And I started kind of combining that with other prophecies about a third of the birds of the air dying, the beast dying, Israel coming to fore, the advent of nuclear power. There was a number of things that I felt that had documented evidence. So at the end of the weekend, I had my math came out to something like 1 in 1.4 trillion that this was random. Now, I sat there and I was rather tired. It was like 9 o'clock at night on Sunday. I had to come back to work in the morning. And I thought to myself, okay, well, either I really made a stupid error and my math was really bad, but I don't have time to go back and recheck any of this, or even if I'm off by a factor of 10, we're in a, excuse me one sec, a one-of-a-kind, unique time in all of human history. And so that revelation started me thinking about my career choices, the types of companies I wanted to work for, the types of projects I wanted to work on, and started me thinking about my own personal life and my own personal choices and all of those kind of things. So I went from there and did some internet, started an internet company or joined an internet company as a startup. And the second key event that kind of led to my later choice in life to become an author occurred about that same time or within a couple of years of that. And I had stumbled on an article that claimed that a program, this was an Associated Press article, so it had some validity in my mind. It wasn't some guy just doing conspiracy theories. And it had said that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories at Sandia. Well, that's an unknown, well-known NSA spy lab. They do signals, they do cryptology. They were the ones that developed the Stuxnet virus that brought down the Iranian nuclear fusion centrifuge. And so I thought, okay, that's. It didn't say it was broken or stolen or that it corrupted or malfunctioned. It said the verb that it used was a program had escaped. And I couldn't put that story out of my head. Escape implies intent. Escape implies intelligence. Escape implies the program had the ability to move itself and then erase its trail so that people couldn't go find it and didn't know where it went. And I obsessed over that. I have these mental obsessions at times where there's a problem that I really feel that I have to solve, and I'm compelled to solve, and I can't put it down. And so I spent time with that, and until I ultimately figured out how a program could escape. I used the technology knowledge I had at the time. I decided, well, why would the NSA build a program with that amazing capability? What was it designed to do? And then I tried to come up with an idea of why it might escape. And about the time that we concluded, I had a dear friend who was a film producer. He wanted to, instead of a film pilot or a film script, we decided that, well, let's build a webisode. Since this is all internet-based, let's build a webisode series to kind of be in line with that and test the idea, whether this was a valid idea for a possible film or something later. And we did. It was a huge success. I had fans from all over the world. We hired out of work actors and did photo shoots and wrote scripts, and it was the whole kit and caboodle. We had one of the studios option the show, and 2 weeks before they were going to exercise the option, 2 FBI agents showed up at my door. They were rather perturbed that I had figured out something they thought should be top secret, and then had the absolute unmitigated audacity to actually publish it. So they wanted me to kill the show. I laughed. My wife was freaking out. What did I do? Who am I? What did I do? This is my new wife at the time, and I was thrilled because to me it confirmed my analysis. But when I basically said no, they went to the studio and killed the deal. I ultimately lost a lot of money, tucked my tail between my legs, went and got a job at Oracle, and continued on with my career. But that event also changed me. That also got me looking at governments and how they use advanced technologies, and where these advanced technologies were going. And this was one of the early stages of artificial intelligence with systems called expert systems. And it got me more deeply involved in a lot of those more advanced technology areas where I could really understand the motives and the potential outcomes of those things. I went on from there. I worked at Oracle for a while, implementing major systems for major corporations. Then I went to work with Microsoft, where I started up their PMO group for their services. PMO meaning Program Management Office. So we were the team that had to go out and do the most complicated deals that they had. And then I started a group at Microsoft to sell their most complicated deals. And ultimately, when I retired, there was something in my heart that wanted to combine these concepts of advanced technologies, political corruption, church corruption, which we can talk about separately, and how those might line up with biblical prophecies. And again, my goal was not to churn on the doctrine or the dogma that I hear many people talking about, not to infuse their political bias or partisan agenda into that analysis, not to consider it a battle between Christianity and Islam, which it's not, but to really try and understand the real world events. And I came up with the conclusion that prophecy was less about how God would destroy humanity as much as how humanity would do it itself. And so I started really looking at climate, all kinds of other issues that tied into that, and that was really the spark when I retired, I wanted to write about it. And so I didn't want to write it in a preachy kind of way. I wanted to write something that would excite people, that would entertain them, that would get them to think, that would be conversation provoking. And so I took I'm a big fan of thrillers, and in particular James Rawlings, Dan Brown, Michael Crichton, who take true technology and then spin an amazing tale of saying, well, what could go wrong? And so so I produced my first couple of books, The Swarm, which deals not only with this program that had escaped, and the program itself used the same techniques that I had used to basically decode end time prophecy. And I started dealing with DARPA weapons that are using artificial intelligence and other technologies, and how many of our advanced technologies are racing faster. They're advancing faster than our ability to control them, either legally or morally or financially. And so that became sort of a formula for me to kind of look at those things in life. So I have had an amazing background during the time when I was in my career. I was also a songwriter, so I wrote songs with Disney. I've recorded 3 or 4 of my own CDs. I lived on a yacht with my son for a while because I didn't want to live in a condo in a difficult part of LA. And so I got a charter captain license from the Coast Guard, and I've gone diving with sharks, and I can talk through a number of amazing adventures I got to live because I was unwilling to accept. I wanted to change my stars, and I did. And that's brought a lot of conflict and a lot of joy. And there's no path in life that is conflict free, but I learned how to deal with those things, hopefully in a much healthier way as I grew and matured.
Once again, this is on Refocus Radio talking to Guy Morris. You can go to his website, GuyMorrisBooks.com. And yeah, man, I mean, that's a lot of history, and that's a very awesome story. I mean, many stories really. But when you see the success you had in your life with not just your career, but like you said moments ago, of just remaining humble, knowing where you started, and kind of having that moral compass, if you will. Like, okay, I'm doing these great things, but I'm still trying to look at the bigger picture here. You know, what was really important in life. How did you continue to just keep that in balance and say, you know what, yeah, I'm doing this great work, but at the same time, what's the most important thing in life still?
Well, to be honest with you, Shemaiah, I didn't always. There were times when I did get sucked into how much money I was making, or how fast I was advancing in the corporation, or whether I got the choice jobs. And while I unlike many people, I had the opportunity to. Oftentimes, the company would basically say, we have a problem over in this area. We want you to go solve it. Go ahead and build your own team. Tell us how you're going to do this. Write your own job description, sort of thing. And that was exciting, but it took me away from my family. And I didn't always keep those things in balance. I had, because of my post-traumatic stress, about a decade or so ago, I had a bit of a breakdown where I just had to kind of quit everything. I kind of shut myself into a room for several months, just trying to recontemplate my life. And it's not always an easy road, but I kept coming back to what I felt was important, and I had to reevaluate and give up those things. I don't make a lot of money as an author, and certainly not the kind of money I was making before. But I'm now kind of refocused on the idea that I have an enormous amount of learned experiences. I'll say it's not that I'm smarter than others. I know that I worked with Microsoft and the Federal Reserve and government, and I've worked with brilliant people my entire life, and their brilliance was part of what motivated me to stay sharp. But what I did give up was the idea that the main goal in life was wealth and prosperity and achievement. I started realizing that people were more important than possessions. And I came to that realization by losing some very important people in my life, like my daughter. And so it was during that time that I started shifting. For a time, I was a president of a small nonprofit that helped children with cancer in the Philippines. I started really kind of shifting away from how hard I was working for the company and started looking at, well, what do I want to do? How do I want to set up my retirement? I'm not a good person. I tell people I have a very dysfunctional relationship with leisure. I'm not the kind of person who can just sit around and watch hours and hours of television. I feel guilty that somehow life is short. I have to be productive. And so I wanted to figure out how I was going to turn all of that. I couldn't keep working 16, 18 hours a day, 6 days, 7 days a week for a company. I had to kind of turn that around and start thinking more about how do I balance that out? How do I find that true balance in life? And part of it was through recognizing loss and dealing with it and going through the emotions of it. Part of it was realizing finally that I had post-traumatic stress and dealing with that. And that took some time and some help from others, which I was always hesitant to do. Accepting help from anybody was always something difficult for me, in part because of the distrust I had developed as a kid, that no one would do it for me. I had to do everything myself. And I had to give up some of those false notions in order to find the true notions. And so obviously my faith in the Lord and reading scripture and trying to really educate myself into those truths that would help me balance all the economic and business and other things that I had grown to become an expert at. And it was the ability to kind of take the signals that we get in life through through celebrities, through politicians, through corporate leaders, through business, through the advertising, and start to tune down the volume of a lot of those and turn up the volume of other things that allowed me to kind of refine that balance in myself. Now, for a time, I thought balance was if I had a very analytical job, I had to balance that by doing creative things on my off time. And that's where the songwriting and the creative ventures, all of that kind of, I thought was helping me find balance. And to a great extent, it did. But I found that there was another area in my life, which was also that humbleness and spirituality, where it wasn't about my accomplishments. Life was not only about my accomplishments, it was also about my humanity. And that was where I really started finding that my sense of peace, my sense of joy, my sense of purpose really started coming into play. There's a lot of people that are largely unaware of big events happening in the world because media doesn't always talk about them, because those aren't the things that will drive viewership and ratings. But I'm not a conspiracy theorist. So for me, it has to be based on something justifiable, something factual, something that I can validate. That pushed me more into the realm of, again, with my books of trying to combine the idea of artificial intelligence with political agendas, with religious corruption that was happening in many of the churches. And we see that today in the Christian nationalist type of movement, which is neither Christ-oriented, it's more of a political power movement, and trying to understand that if we are in a end times kind of scenario, how do we then reevaluate our lives so that we can mainly focus on the right priorities so that we're prepared. And so I realized that I had a calling, in a sense, to basically try and write my thrillers. And I try to write them really well. I've been compared to Dan Brown, Robert Ludlum, which is The Bourne Identity, Tom Clancy, and others. So I know I'm doing a good job at creating compelling stories, but I wanted the theme of those stories to come back to the conflict between power and wealth and the systems that really run the world, and then who we are as individuals and how to bring that as a higher priority. So I've really been excited. My latest book, The Last Ark, deals with a little known as part of prophecy. Many people talk about a third temple. Well, I've always thought that seemed very highly unlikely, given all of the politics and everything else. And so I was in my research. I actually landed a few years ago on a story that the Ark of the Covenant that has been in Ethiopia for the last 2,600 years, left Jerusalem actually 2,600 years ago. And there's a well-documented history. There's Graham Hancock specials. There's National Geographic specials. A number of people have done specials on the history, so I won't go into detail there. But in January 21, an Ethiopian army and a militia basically stormed Axum, and 750 men, women, and children, including the guardian of the Ark, were massacred trying to protect the Ark. It was ultimately stolen and sold on the black market. Now, for me, again, my more mathematical kind of mind said, well, if that's a really highly unusual, unique event that has very, very low probability of occurring just randomly for no reason, how does that play into all of these other things? And that along with a second ark, and another, again, a story most people aren't aware of. In the 1960s, there was a copper scroll found outside of Qumran, where all the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. And unique to all of the other Dead Sea Scrolls, it was written not only because it was written on copper, but it was written in a more ancient Proto-Israeli Hebrew language. And that scroll described 64 locations where temple priests had hidden pre-Babylonian treasures, billions and billions of dollars worth of treasures. And in the 64th location was a second copper scroll that described where Jeremiah had hidden the Ark of Testimony made by Moses. For 50 years, no one's been able to find any of those locations. They were all looking in the wrong place. They were all looking at Jerusalem. About 6, maybe 7 years ago, somebody actually decoded all 64 locations underneath the ruins of Qumran itself. And those locations were validated by an Israeli archaeology and antiquities group metal scan to confirm that indeed there was gold, silver, non-ferrous metals under every one of those locations. But Israel can't dig there because that's Palestinian West Bank territory. And if they did, all of it would legally have to go into a warehouse and they'd never see it again. So that was about the same time Israel started talking about a single state solution. So in my head, again, the probability that this would happen, along with all of these other dozens and dozens of other prophecies that have been fulfilled in the last 70 years would occur, that it just became another piece of the puzzle. And the political, I would call piece deal for political theater that's depicted in the last arc is grounded on those two factual events. And so I started looking at all of the other multitude of factual events that are occurring underneath the covers where most people don't see, and trying to bubble them up and building them into a thriller so that it was fun to read while it got you to think, so that it wasn't some sort of non-fictional sort of dissertation about how all these things are occurring, but would actually be written in a way that would engage people, normal people, into the topics.
You've been listening to Army Focus Radio, talking to our guest for today, Guy Morris. You can go to his website. His website is guymorrisbooks.com. And lastly, before we let you go, one more question. You are a founder of the Author Event Network Association. You
Yes.
share with the audience a little bit about that and what is the vision for that?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. As a new author, my first book came out in November 2020, right before the November election, so it deals with some of those election issues. My second book, The Curse of Cortez, which a completely separate thread, that one took me a decade to write, and then my third one just came out a couple of months ago, or last month in November 2022. One of the challenges of an indie author is trying to get attention, and it's extremely expensive and difficult to get attention on Amazon with ads, or to get attention with social media, or to get attention and to build sales and to build a market. But so I had done some book signings early on with my first book at Barnes & Noble, and those went really well, but it was sort of a one-off type of deal. And so what I wanted was I actually stumbled onto another small group that every year they went to this one local festival and with a group of authors, and they sold and signed their books. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. That festival got 15 to 20,000 people or 25,000 people. I sold more books than I had ever had at any other event, any of my other signing events. And I realized the power of me being able to engage with readers about the stories behind my books, and the power of being if you go to these events, unlike a book festival where there's thousands or tens of thousands of other books and other authors, we were the only tent that had authors signing their books. And so I realized that there was an untapped market there. And so I formed a author event network as a nonprofit association. Authors, indie and published authors join our group. We started here in Seattle, and we did about 10 or 12 events last year, which was our first year in operation. We're now signed up or on tap to do 25 to 30 events this year. We've also opened up a Portland chapter of authors where they're going to do the same thing there. And this is a channel where authors can basically join up, and we'll be looking at how to expand that and as well to other cities and major metropolitan areas, with the basic concept of we want to enable authors to go out and engage readers, engage readers directly, expand their platform, and earn higher margins where you don't have to pay the big fees to Amazon or bookstores or others, where you're basically keeping a bigger piece of that. And so it's been we've proven the success this year that we can do it repeatedly over multiple events. I'm now talking to one event where we showed up last year with a single tent, and our success is now where we're asking them if we can have 3 tents this year, back to back. So we've had children's writers and nonfiction writers and memoir writers and crime fiction and fantasy and sci-fi. And I know I'm forgetting horror. I write thrillers. And so we have multiple genres represented in the group. And it's allowing us to basically build a channel for authors on a local, regional level, where they can go out and through these major festivals, fairs, and events that can bring in anywhere from a few thousand to some of them bring in up to 100,000 people, go out and engage those audiences with and sign books. And it's been an amazing experience. I'm loving it. It's a lot of work. We're hauling tents and tables all summer long. I'll be at an event every weekend from the end of May through. I live up here in the Northwest, so we only have a short season, but from the end of May through the end of September, and then a little bit on either side of that, we'll basically every weekend I'll be out signing books this year.
You've been listening to Focus Radio, talking to our guest today, Guy Morris, and you can go to his website, GuyMorrisBooks.com. Last thing before we let you go, what you say to our listeners, those who may still be trying to, I guess you can say, go to the next level in their life. Maybe they are good at, confidently, mentally, but just maybe they need that extra boost of motivation to continue forward.
While I've had a lot of successes, I've also had failures. And there is a time when you spend time licking your wounds and trying to understand why you failed. But I would encourage everyone out there to find your purpose, and to feel comfortable that you're seeking your purpose, even if you don't find it right away, and if you're making mistakes along the way, don't give up. There's always the opportunity for someone who will persevere, and I think that's the best ingredient, the most important ingredient to anyone's success is perseverance, and the ability to tell yourself that I'm not only going to do what I want to do, I'm going to keep doing it until I believe that I could be one of the best, and challenge yourself that way. Don't let yourself off the hook. Be your best coach, be your best supporter, believe that you can. Don't give up on yourself, because the investments that you make in yourself and in your future will not only benefit you, but they'll benefit those around you. And to be faithful to why you were born and who you were born to be doesn't come easy. But it does come for those who are willing to put in the heart, the humility, and the hard work to get there.
Some great words, man, by Guy Morris. Make sure you go to his website, guymorrisbooks.com, and you can get his books on Amazon. And also check out real quick, how can people be a part of the Author Event Network Association? What's the process to do that?
Oh, there's an application process. We don't take just anybody. We want to make sure that they're, as some of my early authors said, is if I'm going to be sitting in a booth next to somebody, I want to make sure that their books are high quality, even if they're a completely different style and genre. And so we're looking at, even if it's an indie author, do they have independent editors, and do they have good book design? Do they format it well? We're looking for people that are good teammates, because we don't want someone to buy a book and then come back the 10th next year and say, well, the book I bought last year was crap, so I don't want to buy anything from any of you people. But if you go to authoreventnetwork.com, it'll tell you a little bit about our group. That will connect you to an application on a different website, because I have more control over that second website. And we have a review committee that basically looks at everybody, but 95% of the people that are really hungry for this make it through and get accepted. And we have monthly meetings that talk about our events. We have online sign-up sheets where you can sign up for future events. And we've got some of our biggest events next year are already full. So, it's a great opportunity. And if you want to start a new chapter in your region or your city, if you're not up in the Northwest, I'll communicate with you. I'll contact you, and we'll talk about the process of maybe gathering other authors in your area to start up a new chapter.
Once again, go to his website, guymorrisbooks.com. I want to say thank you again, Guy Morris, for taking time in your schedule, talking to Refocus Radio today.
Thank you so much, Shemai. It's been an honor and a pleasure. Appreciate it.